The dark truth hit me as my right cheek pressed against the freezing, polished mahogany dining table. I tried to lift my head, but my neck felt like it was filled with wet sand. A thick, suffocating fog had completely wrapped around my brain, making every single thought move as painfully slow as a melting glacier. When I forced my eyes open, the world tilted dangerously. The massive crystal chandelier overhead shattered into a dozen blinding spots of light. I blinked hard, trying to clear the blur, but the whole room seemed to be spinning off its axis. A nauseating, waxy taste of smeared lipstick hung on the corners of my mouth. At the same time, I felt the icy blast of the central AC blowing straight onto my bare chest. I looked down through the haze, and pure panic shot through me. My expensive emerald silk shirt was entirely misaligned. 3 small pearl buttons had been shoved into the wrong holes, twisting the fabric into a wrecked mess and exposing a swath of delicate black lace underneath. I scrambled to fix myself, but my fingers were completely numb, fumbling awkwardly with the buttons. It made 0 sense. I had been sitting in this formal dining room all evening, and I had drunk precisely half a glass of Cabernet Sauvignon. The sharp clink of crystal glasses and a burst of arrogant laughter shattered my confusion. I forced my heavy head to turn and saw them gathered by the marble fireplace. Terence, the man who swore before God at our wedding to love and protect me for the rest of my life, was throwing his head back in a booming laugh. He had a glass of top-shelf amber cognac in his hand. Standing right next to him was his mother, Valerie, surrounded as always by her suffocating floral perfume and a wall of unearned superiority. Sitting on the velvet sofa were Terence's older brother, Malik, and his white wife, Chloe. Chloe was swirling her drink, staring directly at me with absolute contempt. Not a single one of them bothered to check on me. Nobody cared that I had just been passed out face down on the formal mahogany table. And God only knew how long I had been under. I gripped the edge of the table, using it to haul my dead weight up. The heavy wooden dining chair let out a sharp screech against the hardwood floor, cutting off their conversation instantly. 4 pairs of eyes snapped toward me. There wasn't a drop of concern in any of them, just a shared, unified wave of annoyance. I stood there, swaying dangerously, forced to hold onto the table just to keep from collapsing backward. What happened? I managed to rasp out. My voice sounded dry, raspy, and completely unrecognizable. I feel so sick. Chloe let out a harsh laugh that echoed off the vaulted ceilings. She strutted over in her designer heels, reached into her clutch, and pulled out a crumpled $20 bill. She tossed it right onto the smooth wood, letting it slide until it stopped right in front of my trembling hands. "Call yourself an Uber, Maya," she sneered, her voice dripping with nasty, condescending pity. "If you can't handle a single glass of Cabernet, you shouldn't be drinking like a grown woman. You're turning yourself into a total embarrassment, ruining Terence's night in his childhood home." I stared at the money, my brain struggling to process the sheer audacity of the insult. Valerie stepped forward, her posture stiff, wearing the cold mask of Southern gentry disapproval. "We always knew Terence marrying a girl raised in the foster care system would bring some unrefined habits into this family," she said smoothly. But her words carried lethal poison. "We tried to be accommodating. We tried to show you how a respectable, cultured family operates. But you just can't help yourself, can you? Passing out at the dinner table like a street vagrant. Please, stop ruining our Sunday dinners with your messy behavior. Just leave before you break something expensive." I looked at Terence, silently begging him to intervene, begging him to do something. He was my husband. We had planned a future together. He knew my past, my struggles, the trauma of being kicked from one foster home to another, until I aged out of the system with nothing but the clothes on my back. He knew how hard I had worked to build a legitimate career in the competitive corporate world, just to defy those awful statistics. But Terence didn't look at me with sympathy. Instead, he walked over, picked up my leather bag from the floor, and shoved it roughly into my hands. His face was completely blank. "Just go home, Maya," he said, his tone flat and irritated. "I'm sick of making excuses for you. Sleep it off in the car. I'll catch a ride back with Malik later. You've ruined the mood for everyone." That betrayal hit heavier than the physical dizziness. He was tossing me out like trash in front of his arrogant family. The same family that never missed a chance to remind me that I was just a stray dog, an outsider, someone completely unworthy of their high society bloodline. I didn't argue. I didn't have the physical energy or the clarity to fight back. I tightened my grip on my bag, my knuckles turning white as I squeezed the leather strap. I turned my back on them and walked out the front door of that massive estate. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind me with a final dull thud. The thick, humid Georgia night air hit me like a physical wall, but it helped clear a fraction of the fog in my mind. I stood on their wide, circular driveway, waiting for the rideshare, feeling a profound, crushing solitude. I had spent years trying to prove I belonged at that table, trying to show Valerie and the rest of them that I was more than a defensive foster kid. I thought marrying Terrence was my ticket into a real family, the kind of American dream family that supported each other unconditionally. Instead, I had married right into a den of vipers. They had always treated me like an unwelcome stray, but tonight felt completely different. That malice felt coordinated and calculated. The specific way my shirt was undone, the waxy taste of lipstick on my mouth, my completely helpless physical state. This wasn't just passing out from being overworked. My body felt violated, manipulated in a dark way. I couldn't fully explain yet. Bright headlights cut through the darkness of the private driveway. I climbed into the back seat and pressed my throbbing head against the cool glass window. The driver checked on me in the rearview mirror, asking if I was all right. I just muttered a quick confirmation, closed my eyes, and prayed for the world to stop spinning. The pain inside my skull was sharp and rhythmic, a heavy thumping that triggered waves of nausea. I needed aspirin. I needed anything to stop the agony spreading across my temples. I pulled my designer bag onto my lap and blindly unzipped the main compartment. My fingers moved past my wallet, keys, and makeup pouch, searching for the little travel bottle of painkillers I always kept on me. But then my fingertips brushed against something small, smooth, and impossibly light. I frowned, deeply confused. Pinching the tiny object between my thumb and index finger, I pulled it out and held it up under the faint glow of the passing streetlights outside. It was a clear gelatin pill casing. It was completely empty, pulled apart in the middle, and whatever powder it once held was long gone. I stared at it, my heart starting to slam violently against my ribs. I didn't take herbal supplements, and I never kept empty capsules in my bag. A dark, horrifying realization began to take shape deep inside my analytical mind. The sudden, unexplainable blackout, the overwhelming drowsiness, and the fact that I had only taken a few sips of wine before the world went pitch black. It wasn't fatigue. That was Rohypnol or some other heavy sedative, a date rape drug. Suddenly, the quiet air in the car was shattered by a sharp, loud alert from my phone. I tossed the empty capsule back into my bag and yanked my phone out of the side pocket. The screen lit up my face in the dark back seat, casting a harsh blue glow over my features. I blinked, forcing my eyes to focus on the text floating on the lock screen. It was an automated security alert from a banking app hidden deep inside an encrypted folder on my phone. The notification read, "Biometric successful. Offshore trust account accessed." The air trapped in my lungs refused to come out. My blood instantly turned to ice, freezing me from the inside out. That specific trust account was legally a ghost. It was my inheritance from my biological grandfather, a Black entrepreneur who built a massive logistics empire in Chicago from scratch. He had spent a lifetime searching for me through the fragmented maze of the foster system, finally finding me just months before he passed away. To make up for a lifetime of absence, He left me $12 million in generational wealth held in that trust. I had never told Terrence about it. I had never told a soul. I kept it completely secret because I knew exactly what kind of people my in-laws were. If they ever found out that money existed, those greedy bloodsuckers would stop at nothing to get their hands on it. The security system on that account was strict military grade. It didn't just require a password. It demanded a live facial recognition scan and verified fingerprints just to view the balance, let alone authorize a transfer. My mind flashed violently back to the mahogany dining room, waking up with my clothes yanked out of place, my lipstick smeared all over my face, Terrence laughing, and Chloe complaining that my clumsiness had dirtied her fingers. They didn't just watch me pass out. They orchestrated the whole thing. They drugged my drink, waited until I lost consciousness, and then moved in on my completely paralyzed body. They pried my eyes open to fool the liveness detection camera. They pressed my thumb against the scanning screen. They used my biometric data to break into my hidden fortune while I lay there like a corpse. The dizziness vanished completely, replaced by a massive pure surge of unadulterated adrenaline. I wasn't an unwanted daughter-in-law anymore. I was prey. A target. But what they didn't know was that the woman they had just drugged and robbed was not about to break down and cry, and she certainly wasn't going to just file for divorce. She was going to tear their entire empire to the ground. The adrenaline coursing through my veins burned away whatever chemical fog was left from the drug in my system. When the Uber pulled up to the driveway of our upscale suburban home, I got out, tipped the driver, and completely bypassed the master bedroom, locking myself straight inside the home office. I retrieved my military-grade, encrypted work laptop from my secure briefcase. My fingers flew across the keyboard by pure muscle memory. I worked as a senior corporate fraud investigator for one of the largest financial security auditing firms on the East Coast. For 5 years, Valerie and Chloe had mocked my career. At every family gathering, they would dismiss me to their wealthy socialite friends with a wave of their hands, claiming I was just a pencil pusher who stared at boring spreadsheets all day. They thought I was a glorified secretary. They had no idea that my actual job was dismantling multi-million-dollar international money laundering networks, tracking offshore shell companies, and hunting down white-collar criminals who thought they left no paper trail. They had picked the absolute wrong person to cross. I booted up a secure VPN, bypassing the initial firewalls of my own banking app. My eyes swept over the glowing lines of code and access logs. I needed to see exactly what they had touched. The alert was linked to a highly classified offshore trust fund. The single part of my life I had completely locked away from Terrence and his family. After seeing how his family operated, I knew silence was my best armor. I had watched them constantly judge people by their tax brackets, stepping on anyone who didn't fit the Atlanta elite standard. If they had known I possessed that kind of capital, they would have manipulated every aspect of my life to control it. Now, staring at the digital footprint on the screen, I watched that armor crack. The access logs showed a successful login originating directly from my in-laws' estate IP address. It happened exactly 22 minutes after I collapsed at the dinner table. I traced the internal navigation. They hadn't transferred the funds yet. When my grandfather set up the trust, he built in a brilliant safety mechanism. A 30-day delayed authorization protocol designed specifically to prevent sudden, coerced liquidations. They had simply logged in, viewed the massive balance, and initiated the preliminary routing sequence. The money was still there, but the 30-day clock was officially ticking. The sound of the front door unlocking downstairs pulled me back from my digital hunt. I quickly closed the laptop, locked it in my desk drawer, and stumbled upstairs to the master bedroom. I threw myself onto the mattress, keeping my clothes crumpled and my lipstick smeared, burying my face in the pillow. I needed to play the role of the clueless prey they thought I was. Porch. The bedroom door creaked open. Heavy footsteps crossed the plush carpet. I let out a soft, groggy groan, pretending I was just waking up. Terrence stood at the foot of the bed. He hadn't even changed out of his tailored suit, and he was looking down at me with an expression of pure disgust. He crossed his arms and let out a harsh, disappointed sigh. Porch. Maya, we need to have a serious talk about your drinking problem, he said, his voice dripping with fake fatherly concern. You completely embarrassed us last night. You were face down on my mother's expensive tablecloth. Chloe was terrified you were going to choke on your own vomit. I had to apologize to everyone for your disgusting behavior. Porch. The sheer level of gaslighting made my blood boil, but I forced tears to well up in my eyes. I pulled the duvet up to my chin, making myself look small, broken, and consumed by shame. I'm so sorry, Terrence, I whispered, letting my voice tremble perfectly. I don't know what happened. I only had half a glass. I must have been so exhausted from work. My body just gave out. Porch. Please tell Valerie and Roland how ashamed I am. Terrence let out another heavy sigh, playing the role of the patient, long-suffering husband to perfection. I'll talk to them, he said patronizingly. But you need to get yourself under control, Maya. This foster kid survival mindset, this complete lack of basic social grace, it's getting impossible to deal with. Take the day off. Porch. Sleep off your hangover. We'll discuss your behavior tonight. He turned and walked out of the room without looking back. I listened to his heavy footsteps go down the stairs, waiting until I heard the distinct roar of his car engine backing out of the driveway. The moment the house went dead silent, the fake tears in my eyes vanished without a trace. Porch. The disguise of the broken, apologetic wife evaporated instantly. I threw off the duvet, walked straight into the bathroom, and used ice-cold water to wash away the smeared lipstick and dirt from my face. I walked back into the home office and pulled out my laptop. The rage burning in my chest was transforming into something sharp, cold, and incredibly dangerous. Porch. I needed to know precisely how they had bypassed the security walls. My grandfather hadn't spared any expense when building this digital vault. Passwords and security questions weren't enough to access this account. I pulled up the developer specifications for the banking software, my eyes scanning the dense technical requirements for Tier 1 asset access. Porch. The text highlighted in red made my breath catch in my throat. The protocol demanded multi-factor biometric authentication. It required a physical fingerprint to verify identity, but that wasn't even the worst part. The second layer required a live facial recognition scan. Porch. The system was designed with liveness detection technology, specifically tracking facial micro-expressions and pupil movement to ensure someone wasn't just holding up a photo or scanning a corpse. The user had to have their eyes wide open. The terrifying truth hit me like a freezing tidal wave. They didn't just drug my drink and steal my phone. Porch. While I was completely unconscious, paralyzed by whatever chemical cocktail they fed me, my husband and his family physically assaulted me. The imagery in my head was sickeningly clear. I imagined Valerie and Roland, two people considered pillars of respectability in their community, violently holding my limp arms down on the table, forcing my thumb onto the digital scanner. Porch. I imagined Chloe, the arrogant sister-in-law who constantly turned her nose up at my background, leaning over my paralyzed body, complaining about her fresh manicure, as she roughly pried my eyelids apart. They forced my eyes open, pointing the camera lens directly at my dilated, unresponsive pupils to satisfy the liveness detection algorithm. They had violated my body. Porch. They had broken into my deepest secret. They thought they had quietly secured a $12 million windfall while keeping the foolish, uncultured foster girl completely in the dark. They thought I would wake up with nothing more than a headache, apologize for making a scene, and quietly wait around until they drained my life savings before inevitably throwing me away. Porch. I slowly closed the laptop, a dark, dangerous smile spreading across my face. They wanted to play a high-stakes game of corporate theft. They wanted to treat me as collateral damage on their path to wealth. But they had no idea that in this script, I was the apex predator. I wasn't going to call the police to freeze the account. I was going to let them think they had won. I was going to let them plan their extravagant vacations and luxury purchases. And then, I was going to tear the bloodline of their entire empire apart from the inside. For the entire week leading up to the next Sunday dinner, I put on a textbook performance of psychological warfare. I smiled at Terrence across the coffee table every morning. I kissed his cheek before leaving for the office. I played the role of the fragile, overwhelmed wife struggling with social anxiety to absolute perfection. But deep down, I was a coil wound so tight it was ready to snap. I reached out to an old contact from my corporate security days, a former military surveillance specialist whom I had helped during a corporate espionage case 2 years ago. He owed me a massive favor. We met in a windowless server room downtown, and I handed him $2,000 in untraceable cash. In exchange, I got a custom microlens camera. It was no larger than the head of a pin, equipped with a high-fidelity audio receiver and a continuous cloud-synced broadcast system. On Friday night, I locked myself in my home office and painstakingly sewed the device right into the structural seam of my favorite black designer leather purse. I aligned the lens with extreme precision, ensuring that as long as the bag sat upright on a table, it would capture the entire room in a wide-angle view. I tested the audio feed 3 times, making sure it picked up even the faintest whispers from 20 feet away. I wasn't just going to catch them in the act. I was going to record an undeniable digital master copy of their felony in crystal clear high definition. Sunday evening arrived, right on schedule. Terrence drove us to his parents' Buckhead estate. The heavy iron gates swung open, revealing the massive brick mansion that had always felt more like a fortress than a home to me. Terrence reached over from the driver's seat and squeezed my knee. "Keep yourself under control tonight, Maya," he said, his voice laced with that sickening, condescending fake affection. "We don't need a repeat of last week's circus. If you feel tired, just stick to water." I nodded, lowering my eyes to look at my hands. "I'll be careful, I promise." Valerie greeted us at the door, wearing a pearl necklace that probably cost more than the entire house I grew up in. She gave me a stiff hug completely devoid of warmth. Malik and Chloe were already in the formal living room. Chloe was holding court like a queen, bragging about her recent shopping trip to Milan, while Malik scrolled through his phone, barely listening to his wife. Roland sat in his leather armchair with a glass of bourbon, radiating the untouchable patriarchal authority of the family. We moved into the dining room and their carefully choreographed dance of deception began. The housekeeper served the first course, but Terrence was the one handling the wine. He walked over to the sideboard and uncorked a fresh bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon. I watched him like a hawk. He poured the first 4 glasses completely normally. Then, his body shifted ever so slightly, using his broad shoulders to block my view as he poured the 5th glass. He walked back to the table and placed that exact glass right in front of me. "To family," he said, raising his crystal glass for a toast. "To family," I echoed, picking up the stemware. I brought the glass to my lips and tilted it back. I let the deep red liquid fill my mouth, but I didn't swallow a single drop. I set the glass down, pulled the thick burgundy napkin off my lap to wipe my mouth, and effortlessly emptied the liquid into the dark fabric without making a sound. Over the next 20 minutes, I repeated the performance 3 times, letting my tongue taste the bitterness without ever letting it slide down my throat. Then, I delivered the most important performance of my life. My responses to Valerie's passive-aggressive questions started to slow down. I blinked heavily, rubbing my temples with exaggerated force. Chloe sneered from across the table, leaning in to whisper something to Malik. I let my shoulders slump forward. Intentionally clumsy, I knocked my silver fork off the edge of the table, letting it crash onto the hardwood floor with a loud, sharp clang. Orch. Oh, I'm so sorry, I slurred out, imitating a thick, heavy tongue perfectly. I suddenly feel so tired. Terrence let out a loud sigh and pushed his chair back. Here we go again, he muttered. I let my eyes roll back and completely collapsed my upper body. A split second before my face slammed into the mahogany table, I tilted my head just enough to avoid breaking my nose. Orch. With a heavy thud, I went totally limp. I slowed my breathing to a shallow, rhythmic pattern, focusing every ounce of mental energy on keeping my muscles completely relaxed. If I flinched or tightened my jaw even a little bit, the whole operation would be blown. For 10 suffocating seconds, the room was dead silent. Then came the sharp click of the heavy oak dining room door locking. Orch. Get her bag, Valerie commanded. Her voice dropping the southern gentry drawl instantly, switching to a sharp, businesslike tone. Make sure the zipper is open so the scanner can pick up the transponder signal. I felt hands reaching for my purse. Terrence set it upright on the dining table right next to my head. Exactly where I needed it to be. Orch. The microlens inside my handbag was now broadcasting every single second of my assault straight to my secure server in a wide-angle view. Hurry up with the tablet, Roland barked. Once the gateway is activated, we only have a 90-second authentication window. Heavy footsteps approached my side of the table. I felt Roland's rough, heavy hand grab my left arm. Orch. With zero regard for my safety, he yanked my arm straight up, twisting my wrist violently until my joints popped. Hold her hand flat, he grunted at Terrence. She's complete dead weight right now. I felt the cold, hard glass of an iPad screen slammed forcefully against the pad of my left thumb. Orch. The system let out a soft digital chime, confirming the first layer of biometric verification was complete. Fingerprint accepted, Terrence said, his warm breath hitting my ear. Now get her face up. Rough hands grabbed my scalp, yanking my hair to pull my head back. Pain shot through my neck as they forced my face toward the chandelier lights. Orch. I kept my eyes shut tight, fighting down every survival instinct screaming at me to fight back, to protect myself, to claw their faces off. I had to remain completely lifeless. Chloe stepped up, her pungent floral perfume making me want to gag. This is disgusting, she complained. I just got my nails done today, and she has all that oily foundation on her face. I am not touching her eyelids. Orch. Just do it, Chloe, Malik snapped from across the room. Do you want the transfer to go through, or do you want to worry about your nails? If the liveness check fails, the account locks for 48 hours and sends a fraud alert straight to her email. I felt sharp acrylic nails dig crudely into my facial skin. Orch. Her thumbs pressed hard into my cheekbones, while her index fingers pinched the soft skin right under my eyebrows. She forcibly yanked my eyelids apart. The blinding light from the dining room chandelier burned my retinas, but I kept my gaze dull, staring straight ahead with a blank, glazed look. Hold the tablet higher, Valerie ordered. The sensor needs to catch the pupil reflection. Orch. Terrence hovered directly above me, holding the iPad just inches from my face. I stared straight into the camera lens, watching the infrared scanner flash rapidly as it mapped the geometry of my face and tracked the tiny movements of my iris. The physical violation was sickening. Orch. My own husband, the man who swore to protect me, was actively helping his family manipulate my unconscious body, just for a payday. Chloe's nails dug deep into my skin, scratching my cheek. Got it, Terrence whispered, triumphantly. Face ID confirmed. Second layer bypassed. We're in the vault. Chloe let go of my face instantly, as if I were carrying a disease. Orch. She stepped back, aggressively wiping her hands with a cloth napkin. Gross, she muttered. Roland dropped my arm, letting it slam heavily onto the edge of the table. I let my head roll naturally back onto the wood, keeping my eyes open just a tiny sliver, just enough to watch the scene through my eyelashes. Orch. The micro lens inside my bag was capturing every single detail. The crystal clear audio of their conspiracy, the physical evidence of the assault, and the explicit discussion of the financial transfer. They were writing their own federal indictment and handing it to me on a silver platter. Porch. Through my eyelashes, I watched Terrence swipe rapidly across the iPad screen, his eyes reflecting the blue light of my grandfather's $12 million trust. He let out a low whistle. "The balance is actually higher than it was last week," he said, a greedy smile spreading across his face. "Initiate the wire transfer queue," Roland ordered, turning to pour himself another bourbon. "Porch. Use the same routing number as the first test batch. Funnel it through the commercial real estate holding company accounts to scrub the source trail before it hits our personal portfolios." Terrence tapped the screen, entering the routing codes. "Queue is set. Under the terms set by the old man, there's a 30-day holding period. We're locked in." Porch. Valerie let out a long sigh of relief, adjusting her pearl necklace. "Good. Now, someone drag her to the guest room so she doesn't ruin the rest of my night when she wakes up." "Wait. Let her lie there for a minute," Terrence instructed, his voice echoing right above my head. I lay completely motionless on the cold mahogany table, holding my breath. Porch. Through my barely open eyelashes, I watched as my husband's silhouette walk casually toward the crystal bar cart in the corner of the room. The sharp clink of ice against expensive glass filled the silence. "I want to enjoy this moment," Terrence said, letting out a low, satisfied laugh. He walked back to the table, standing right over my limp body. Porch. The pungent smell of high-end bourbon drifted over me. 30 days. That's all we have to wait. The funds are officially locked in the clearinghouse queue. Roland cleared his throat from his leather armchair, heavy footsteps moving back toward the table. "Are you absolutely sure she won't see the notifications, Terrence?" Porch. "If that girl checks her email and sees a pending $12 million wire, she'll freeze the account before the sun comes up." "I already took care of it," Terrence replied, his tone dripping with arrogant confidence. Before dinner, I grabbed her phone out of her bag. I disabled every single push notification for her secure email and banking apps. Porch. "She thinks she's so smart working in corporate fraud investigation, but she's completely blind. She'll wake up tomorrow assuming she just drank too much again. She won't even think to check that specific account because she thinks nobody on Earth even knows it exists." Porch. Terrence had no idea that my primary security alert system was hardwired to a secondary encrypted server, which pushed notifications straight to a discreet anklet I wore, strapped under my trousers. He thought he was a criminal mastermind, but his level of digital security was an absolute joke. Porch. "So what about the legal separation?" Valerie asked, her heavy floral perfume completely smothering the smell of the roasted lamb we had just eaten. "You can't just take the money and leave her in your house, Terrence. If you file standard divorce papers, her lawyers will subpoena your financial records during discovery. They'll trace those offshore routing numbers right back to us." Porch. "You know how ruthless those corporate attorneys are." "I'm not filing standard divorce papers," Terrence said, taking a slow sip of his drink. "I'm having her institutionalized." That sentence hit me straight in the chest like a heavy blow. I kept my face completely relaxed, but my heart was hammering violently inside my ribs. Porch. "I've already laid the groundwork," Terrence continued, his voice smooth and calculating. "For the past 2 months, I've been dropping hints to her boss and colleagues about her severe paranoia and stress issues. I told them her childhood trauma from the foster system finally caused a mental breakdown. Tomorrow morning, I start gaslighting her about her blackout tonight. Porch. I'll make her believe her memory is deteriorating the second the 30-day holding period expires, and the money is laundered into our commercial real estate accounts. I'm calling an ambulance. I'll tell the paramedics she had a violent psychotic episode and tried to harm herself." Chloe laughed from the sofa, the sound of her mocking my fabricated downfall, turning my blood stone cold. Porch. "That is pure genius," Chloe said, swirling her cognac. "The courts will grant you emergency medical power of attorney without a second thought. A wealthy, respected businessman taking care of his traumatized foster kid wife? Judges will eat that up. You lock her away in a psychiatric facility for a mandatory 90-day evaluation. Orch. By the time she gets out and tries to tell anyone her money was stolen, the doctors will just write it off as another paranoid delusion. Exactly, Terrence agreed. She'll be stripped of her financial autonomy. I'll have legal control over her assets. Orch. I'll complete the transfers, wash the money through our shell companies, and slap her with the divorce papers while she's still strapped to a hospital bed. She won't get a single dime of that old man's fortune. Malik spoke up for the first time, slapping his younger brother on the back. Finally, some good news. The commercial real estate portfolio has been bleeding cash for 8 months. Orch. The bank is ready to call the loans on the downtown properties. If we don't inject this capital by next month, the whole family business goes into default. We were completely ruined. The final pieces of their plot clicked together perfectly in my mind. They weren't just greedy, they were desperate. Orch. The massive Atlanta real estate empire that Roland and Valerie bragged about at country club dinners was secretly bankrupt. They were drowning in debt, and my hidden $12 million trust was their desperate lifeline. To save their fragile public image and failing business, they didn't hesitate to drug me, assault me, and plan to lock me in a psych ward for the rest of my life. Orch. We needed to cleanse this family's bloodline anyway, Chloe added, her voice dripping with deep-rooted elitist venom. I'm sick of having to fake a smile at her during Sunday dinners. Just because she works at some corporate security firm, she looks down on us with that smug attitude. She has no lineage, no pedigree. She's just a piece of street trash that got lucky. Orch. Terrence, you deserve a woman who actually matches our social standing. A woman who understands how high society families actually operate. Valerie scoffed in agreement. She was a mistake from the start, but at least she brought a generous dowry. Now, grab her legs, Malik. Throw this trash out of my dining room before she wakes up and ruins my night again. Rough hands grabbed my ankles. Orch. Malik grunted, complaining about my weight as he lifted my lower body into the air. Terrence grabbed me under my arms, his fingers digging painfully into my skin. They lifted me out of the dining room and hauled me up the grand curved staircase. They carelessly swung my body on the landing, my head narrowly missing the solid oak railing, but they didn't even pause to adjust their grip. Orch. They were carrying me like a piece of discarded luggage. Reaching the end of the second-floor hallway, they kicked open the guest room door. With a synchronized grunt, my husband and his brother threw my body straight into the air. I hit the hard guest mattress with a heavy thud, my spine twisting uncomfortably against the thick comforter. Take her shoes off, Terrence panted. Orch. We need it to look like she put herself to bed. Malik roughly yanked my leather heels off my feet, tossing them carelessly onto the carpet. Terrence lingered beside me for a moment. I could feel his gaze on my face. He leaned down, his breath brushing against my ear. Sleep tight, you stupid girl, he whispered. Orch. The door clicked shut, and the heavy brass lock turned from the outside, sealing me in the dark room. I lay completely still for 30 seconds, listening as their heavy footsteps faded down the hallway and retreated down the stairs. I waited until the faint echoes of their arrogant laughter reached me from the first floor. Then, I opened my eyes. Orch. The room was pitch black except for a sliver of pale moonlight filtering through the blinds. I sat up slowly, the lingering drowsiness from the sedative fighting hard against the massive rush of adrenaline in my veins. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed and walked silently toward the adjoining guest bathroom. Orch. I shut the door and flipped on the vanity light, staring at my reflection in the gilded mirror. The woman looking back at me was a picture of complete violation. My emerald silk shirt was ripped at the top buttonhole, where they had roughly grabbed my collar. The delicate lace camisole underneath was completely exposed. Orch. Dark red lipstick was smeared violently across my right cheek, dragged down to my jawline from where Chloe had pressed her manicured hands onto my face to force my eyes open. I didn't cry. I didn't break down. The foster system had taught me how to survive around monsters, and my career as a fraud investigator had taught me how to destroy them. Torch. The frightened, betrayed wife vanished completely under the harsh bathroom lights. The person walking back into the guest room was a senior investigator preparing for war. I walked silently to the corner of the room where the housekeeper had placed my overnight bag. Since Terrence usually got wasted on Sundays, we routinely stayed the night. Torch. Unzipping the bottom compartment of the duffel, I pulled out my primary weapon. It was a matte black, encrypted workstation laptop, built specifically for high-level financial investigations. I sat cross-legged on the floor in the darkest corner of the room, resting the laptop on my knees as I booted up the system. The screen cast a pale blue glow across my face. Torch. Bypassing the standard login, I executed a sequence of keystrokes to access my offline secure network. First, I established a secure connection to the microlens camera sewn into the lining of my designer purse, which was still sitting upright on the dining room table, right where Terrence had left it. A high-definition video feed popped up on my screen. Torch. Slipping a wireless earpiece into my right ear, the audio came through crystal clear. I watched my in-laws gathered around the fireplace, clinking their glasses and smoking cigars, toasting to their newly secured fortune and my impending institutionalization. I initiated a direct cloud backup, locking the video and audio evidence across 3 independent, highly encrypted server locations. Torch. In flawless broadcast resolution, they had just confessed to conspiracy, wire fraud, poisoning, and attempted kidnapping. Next, I opened my financial terminal. My fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up the back-end architecture of the offshore trust account they had just accessed. Torch. Thanks to my security clearance and the emergency fail-safes my grandfather had built into the trust, I had admin access to the routing protocols. I located the transaction Terrence had just initiated. $12 million was sitting in the digital holding queue, waiting for the 30-day security timer to expire before moving to the routing numbers Terrence had entered. Torch. I pulled up the target account details. Just as Roland had instructed, Terrence had directed the money to a commercial real estate holding company registered under their family business. They thought they had won. They thought the money was guaranteed. What they didn't know was that the digital holding queue wasn't a locked vault. It was a bridge, and I controlled the traffic. Torch. Opening a separate terminal, I began drafting the framework for a blind, irrevocable shell company registered in a jurisdiction completely outside the reach of U.S. financial subpoenas. I named the shell company after my late mother. For the next 2 hours, I typed silently in the dark, weaving an invisible digital trap that no accountant or bank manager could detect until it was far too late. Torch. I wasn't going to cancel the transfer. Stopping it would alert them, triggering a panic where they might try to destroy evidence. I was going to let Terrence wake up every morning for the next month, believing he was a mastermind. I was going to smile at him over breakfast while he laid the groundwork for my fake mental breakdown. Torch. Instead of canceling the wire, I accessed the back-end code of their target account. Using a specialized masking protocol I'd acquired during a federal task force operation, I modified the final destination parameters. When the 30-day timer expired and Terrence confidently hit the final authorization button, the system would never deposit my $12 million into his family business. Torch. The reroute would execute a * mirror swap. The moment Terrence clicked that button, he would unwittingly authorize a complete and total liquidation of his family's own commercial real estate liquidity. Torch. Every remaining dollar, every operational fund, and every emergency reserve under his parents' names would instantly drain from their accounts and transfer permanently into the offshore shell company I controlled. He was going to use his own hands to bankrupt his entire family line. I hit the execute key, locking the new routing code into the banking mainframe. Torch. Green confirmation text flashed across the screen. Closing the laptop, I slid it back into the hidden compartment of my duffel bag. I walked back to the bed, pulled the covers to my chest, and stared at the dark ceiling as a cold, hard smile spread across my face. The ultimate counterattack had officially begun. Morning sunlight crept through the blinds, painting harsh streaks across the guest room floor. Less than an hour before Terrence usually woke up, I closed my encrypted laptop, stuffed it back into my travel bag, and made sure every zipper was aligned. I stripped off the torn silk shirt and changed into loose sweatpants and an old college t-shirt, deliberately making myself look disheveled and exhausted. Crawling back under the heavy comforter, I closed my eyes and slowed my breathing to a deep rhythmic pace. The heavy brass handle turned, and the door slammed open against the wall. Terrence strode into the room wearing a tailored navy suit, smelling of expensive cologne and fresh espresso. He kicked the edge of the mattress with the tip of his polished Oxford shoe. "Get up, Maya," he barked, his voice filled with forced irritation. "I am not going to be late for my morning meeting, just because you decided to embarrass me in front of my entire family last night." I let out a faint, confused groan and sat up slowly, rubbing my temples. Squinting against the sunlight, I played the fragile, broken woman he so desperately needed me to be. "My head is pounding," I whispered, staring at the carpet. "I'm so sorry, Terrence. I don't know what happened last night." "You drank like a frat boy on a weekend bender, that's what happened," he snapped, pacing at the foot of the bed. Chloe was disgusted. "My mother had to get the housekeeper to wash the dining tablecloth because she was terrified you left a stain. You know how proud my parents are of their Sunday dinners, and you acted like you were back in a foster home grabbing scraps." "It's embarrassing, Maya. I'm a respected executive in this city, and my wife can't handle a single glass of wine without making a complete fool of herself." I swallowed the rage, threatening to surge up my throat, forcing tears into my eyes and letting my shoulders slump limply. "You're right," I mumbled, my voice trembling with perfect, fake sincerity. "I must be exhausted from work. My body just crashed." "Please tell your parents how ashamed I am. I'll call Valerie later to apologize." Terrence scoffed, adjusting his silk tie in the vanity mirror. "Don't bother calling my mother today. She's deeply upset by your behavior and in no mood for your excuses. Just get yourself home and stay out of trouble. I have major acquisition deals to handle for the family portfolio today." He turned and strode out, leaving me alone in the suffocating mansion. I waited until the roar of his engine faded down the long private drive. The moment he was gone, the pathetic tears in my eyes vanished. I stood up, straightened my spine, and my mind instantly switched back into corporate warfare mode. I ordered a rideshare straight to my downtown office. That high-rise security building was my true sanctuary. Swiping my badge through 3 layers of reinforced glass doors, I locked myself inside my private analytical suite. I pulled the blinds and booted up an air-gapped terminal completely isolated from any external monitoring networks. It was time to build the trap completely. I needed a destination for the massive capital I was about to hijack from my in-laws. Opening standard domestic accounts would trigger federal red flags, so I went offshore. Using a disguised digital identity, I established an airtight, irrevocable shell company in Nevis, where financial privacy laws were absolute and immune to U.S. subpoenas. I stared at the blinking cursor requesting a corporate name, a genuine smile touching my lips. I typed in Loretta Holdings, honoring my late mother, a black woman who scrubbed floors and worked double shifts just to keep a roof over my head. My arrogant in-laws thought they were dealing with street trash. They had no idea that the legacy of a hard-working black woman was about to swallow their fake empire whole. With the shell company established, I turned my attention to the bank mainframe. Accessing the back-end architecture of my grandfather's trust fund, I located the transaction Terrence had parked in the 30-day liquidation queue. That $12 million was sitting there frozen, awaiting final execution commands. Opening the code, I injected a specialized masking protocol, leaving the visible user interface completely untouched. When Terrence checked the app on his phone, everything would look entirely normal. The pending transfer would still display my money heading into his commercial real estate account. Underneath the surface, however, I rewrote the underlying routing logic, programming a * digital boomerang. I linked the authorization trigger directly to the IP address of Terrence's mobile device and his family's primary holding account. When the 30-day timer finally expired and Terrence pressed the approve button, the system would ignore my trust fund entirely. Instead, it would recognize his command as a total liquidation order directed at his own assets. The protocol would bite hard into Roland and Valerie's commercial bank accounts, their emergency reserves, and their operational liquidity, draining every single available dollar they owned to fill that $12 million request and instantly routing it into Loretta Holdings. I pressed enter, locking the new parameters into the global banking network. The trap was set, armed, and completely invisible. The phone on my desk rang, shattering the quiet of the office. Glancing at the caller ID, I saw Valerie's name flashing on the screen. Clearing my throat, I adjusted my tone to sound weak and breathy before picking up. "Good morning, Valerie," I said softly. "Maya?" Her voice dripped with condescending pity. "I'm only calling because Terrence asked me to check on your fragile state. I hope you're feeling sufficiently ashamed of last night's scene." "I'm mortified, Valerie." "I really am," I replied, sliding my finger along the edge of the desk. "I feel like my memory is playing tricks on me." From the moment we sat at the table, everything is a total blank. Did I say anything inappropriate before I passed out? I could practically hear her smug smile through the receiver. "You didn't say anything, Maya. You just collapsed like a common alcoholic. It is deeply concerning. Roland and I were discussing it, and we strongly feel you are suffering from severe neurological instability. A woman your age shouldn't be having blackouts and lost time. It points to a deep psychological breakdown. You need to prepare yourself because you may require professional institutional help." They were already laying the groundwork for my forced psychiatric hold, thinking they were orchestrating a masterclass in psychological manipulation. "I appreciate your concern, Valerie," I whispered, injecting a trace of fear into my voice. "I'll talk to Terrence about seeing a doctor." "You had better," she snapped before abruptly hanging up. Setting the receiver down, I saved the audio recording of the call directly into my secure evidence vault. Let her build her narrative. The higher they climbed on their pedestal of lies, the harder they would hit the concrete. Late that afternoon, I returned to our high-end suburban home. Tying on a printed apron, I prepared a roast chicken dinner, playing the role of a beautiful, remorseful wife, trying to make amends for her failures. The sun was just beginning to set, casting long orange shadows across the manicured lawn, when the roar of a high-performance engine shook the front windows of the house. Wiping my hands on a dish towel, I walked out onto the front porch. Terrence was driving a gleaming, aggressively sleek, brand-new black Porsche Carrera into the driveway. The deep black paint reflected the setting sun, and the engine let out a low growl of expensive power. Cutting the ignition, he stepped out of the driver's seat, wearing designer sunglasses. A wide grin spreading across his face. Tossing the heavy metal key fob into the air, he caught it smoothly and walked up the brick path. "What is this, Terrence?" I asked, keeping my face completely neutral. "This, my dear wife, is what real success looks like," he bragged, stroking the sports car's smooth hood. "My father and I closed a massive operational deal today, securing the future of the family business. Roland was so pleased with my strategic planning that he approved an early payout on executive bonuses. I decided to treat myself. After dealing with the stress you've put me through, I deserve it." He walked up the porch steps, brushing past me, pausing before opening the front door. Try not to scratch it when you walk past it, Maya. The paint job alone costs more than you make in 6 months, staring at your little spreadsheets. I turned, looking at the brilliant piece of German engineering parked in my driveway. Porch. The smell of premium leather and burning rubber hung in the humid Georgia air. Terrence strutted inside, completely drunk on his own fabricated sense of superiority. He thought he was celebrating a $12 million victory, totally unaware that he had just leveraged a failing real estate portfolio. One that was secretly bleeding to death. To buy a luxury sports car. Porch. He didn't know his massive operational deal was nothing more than a digital mirage sitting in a holding queue under my control. He was proudly revving the engine of his own destruction, completely oblivious to the fact that he had just handed me the keys to his entire family's financial legacy. In exactly 29 days, he would drive that car straight off a financial cliff. Porch. The entire week following the arrival of that ridiculous black sports car was an exhausting test of psychological endurance. I forced myself to shrink back inside my own home, playing the role of a deteriorating, mentally unstable wife to absolute perfection. I intentionally left my car keys in the refrigerator. I asked Terrence the exact same question twice within an hour. Porch. Drooping my shoulders, I kept my voice barely above a whisper. Every fake symptom of cognitive decline I displayed was met with a deeply condescending smile from Terrence, who acted like the ultimate patient husband while secretly gloating over my supposed breakdown. The true test of my acting came on a rainy Tuesday night. Porch. Standing in the spacious chef's kitchen, I gripped a mug of chamomile tea with trembling hands, radiating complete mental fragility. Terrence walked in, tossing his expensive tailored suit jacket over the back of a bar stool. He carried a thick, oversized manila envelope under his arm, smelling of new leather seats and expensive scotch, thus nauseating stench of an unearned victory. Porch. Maya, honey, sit down for a second, he said, his voice dripping with an artificial sweetness that instantly put my fraud investigator alarms on high alert. I shuffled over to the granite kitchen island, clutching my mug like a lifeline, looking up at him with wide, hollow eyes. Is something wrong, Terrence? I asked, letting my voice quiver. Porch. Nothing is wrong, sweetie, he lied smoothly, pulling a stack of densely printed legal documents from the envelope and placing them on the granite counter between us. It's just tax season. With my family handling all the new commercial property acquisitions, our accountants need to update our joint disclosure filings. Porch. I know your mind has been scrambled since you passed out at my parents' place last week. You've been so forgetful, so tired. I didn't want to burden you with tedious financial paperwork, so I had the attorneys draft everything up. All you need to do is sign on the dotted line. He was using my fake vulnerability as a weapon to blindside me. Porch. In his arrogant mind, I was just a traumatized foster kid who knew nothing about complex wealth management, convinced my brain was too confused to process what he was sliding across the table. He forgot that I spent 10 hours a day auditing fraudulent corporate contracts. I didn't need the documents facing right side up to read their structural DNA. Porch. My eyes scanned the upside-down pages with practiced precision. Ignoring his soothing, distracting chatter, I focused entirely on the bold subheadings and specific legal terms buried in the dense paragraphs. My heart turned stone cold. These weren't routine tax disclosures at all. Porch. The top document was a * quit claim deed, a legally binding mechanism designed to immediately strip my name off the deed to our marital home, transferring sole and exclusive ownership directly to him. The betrayal didn't stop there. Stacked directly beneath the deed was a severely one-sided postnuptial agreement. I read the inverted clauses with chilling clarity. Porch. The document contained an ironclad waiver of spousal support, requiring me to forfeit any right to alimony, any claim to family business assets, and all access to our joint savings accounts in the event of a divorce. He was laying the final bricks of my financial grave. He wanted the house. He wanted my grandfather's $12 million. Porch. and he wanted to ensure that when he finally threw me into a psych ward and slapped me with divorce papers, I would be dumped onto the street with absolutely nothing to my name. "This is so much to read, Terrence," I whispered, letting my hands visibly shake as my fingers hovered over the stack of paper. "Are you sure I need to sign all of this tonight? My head is hurting so badly." "Orch." He stepped closer, placing a large warm hand on my trembling shoulder, trapping me against the edge of the kitchen island. "I know it's overwhelming, sweetie," he coaxed softly, kissing the top of my head. "But my father needs these filed first thing tomorrow morning to lock in our tax bracket. You don't need to read the fine print. You know I always take care of everything. Just trust me." "Orch." I looked up into his eyes, seeing the bottomless pit of his greed hidden behind his handsome face. "I'll sign," I said, giving him a weak, submissive smile. "You always know what's best for this family?" Terrence beamed, pulling a heavy gold-plated Mont Blanc pen from his shirt pocket and handing it to me. "Here, use this," he instructed. "Orch." Reaching for the expensive pen, I deliberately fumbled my grip, knocking the smooth metal barrel against the granite counter so it clattered onto the floor. It rolled beneath the heavy kitchen island, completely out of reach. "Oh, I've been so clumsy lately," I gasped, shrinking back and clutching my mouth in fake horror. "I am so sorry, Terrence. My hands just won't stop shaking." "Orch." He let out a sharp, irritated sigh as his mask of a patient husband slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing massive annoyance. "It's fine, Maya," he snapped, crouching down and awkwardly shoving his long arm under the island to retrieve his prized pen. That 3-second window was all I needed. Orch. Reaching into the side pocket of my purse sitting on the counter, I pulled out my own unassuming black ballpoint pen. It was a specialized tactical tool given to me by a federal security contact who handled covert field operations. To the naked eye, it looked like a standard office pen, writing in smooth, dark black ink. Orch. The chemical composition inside the cartridge, however, was military grade, a highly volatile liquid solvent designed for classified documentation. The ink reacted with oxygen, breaking down its own pigment structure at a molecular level. Orch. Exactly 48 hours after touching paper, the chemical compound would completely and permanently evaporate, leaving no residue, no indentation, and absolutely zero proof that a signature had ever existed. Terrence stood up, his face flushed from the effort, dusting off his trousers. He held out his gold pen again, but I had already clicked the cap off my black tactical pen. Orch. "It's okay, I have my own pen right here," I said, offering him a sweet, innocent smile. "Where do I need to sign?" His eyes flicked to the cheap-looking plastic pen in my hand, but his eagerness to lock down the stolen assets overruled his attention to detail. Orch. "Initial at the bottom of the first 3 pages, then sign your full name on the last 2, he instructed eagerly, pointing at the designated lines. Leaning over the cold granite, I pressed the tip of the disappearing ink pen onto the crisp white paper, signing my name with flawless precision. I initialed the quitclaim deed that gave away my house. Orch. I signed the postnuptial agreement, waiving my rights to every asset I owned. With a steady hand and a racing heart, I handed him the keys to my entire life. The moment my pen lifted off the final page, Terrence snatched the documents off the counter, not even bothering to hide his triumphant grin. He flipped rapidly through the pages, verifying my signature was secured on every required line. Orch. Tapping the papers neat against the counter, he slid them back into the manila envelope, clutching it tightly to his chest. "Thank you, Maya," he said, his voice trembling with an adrenaline rush of victory. "I'm going to drop these off at my father's office right now so his legal team can file them first thing in the morning. Go upstairs and get some rest. You look terrible." Orch. He didn't even wait for my response. Turning on his heel, he practically sprinted toward the garage door, desperate to secure his stolen assets. I stood silently in the middle of the kitchen, listening to the heavy door slam shut and the furious roar of his new Porsche backing out of the garage. I watched his headlights sweep across the front windows before accelerating into the rainy night. Porch. Looking down at the black plastic pen in my palm, a low, dark laugh escaped my lips, echoing off the high kitchen ceilings. Terrence was speeding through the rain to deliver a stack of legal documents to his father that would turn into blank sheets of paper by Thursday night. He thought he was tightening the financial net around me, destroying me completely. Porch. He had no idea he was rushing to file worthless trash while his own commercial real estate empire was quietly bleeding out into my offshore shell company. Walking over to the sink, I poured the chamomile tea down the drain. Tonight's performance was over. I needed to prepare for the final phase of the digital transfer. As I turned to go upstairs, however, my phone buzzed on the counter. Porch. The screen lit up with a text message from Chloe. Maya, sweetie, I know you've been struggling lately, but the Atlanta Heritage Charity Brunch is this Saturday. As part of the executive host committee, I must insist that you come. Getting out of the house will be good for you. Don't worry about driving. I'll send a car for you so we don't have any embarrassing accidents. Dress appropriately. Porch. I stared at the text on my screen. Chloe wasn't extending an olive branch, she was building a narrative. She wanted to showcase my supposed deteriorating mental state in front of Atlanta's wealthiest, most influential socialites, cementing Terrence's story that I was losing my mind. She wanted a public spectacle. I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. Porch. Chloe thought she was luring a wounded animal into a social trap. What she didn't know was that I had spent the entire morning tracking the digital flow of money into her personal accounts, and I had just discovered a massive financial secret she was desperately hiding from her own husband. I'm really looking forward to it, I replied, a cold, sharp smile on my face. Porch. I wouldn't miss it for the world. Saturday morning arrived with the stifling, humid Georgia heat, but the air inside the Piedmont Country Club was blasted with air conditioning into a crisp, wealthy perfection. I stepped out of the black sedan. Chloe had thoughtfully sent for me. Porch. She wanted to make sure I didn't have any fabricated accidents on the way, fitting right into her carefully crafted narrative that I was losing my grip on reality. I wore a tailored beige pantsuit that radiated understated elegance, but I kept my makeup minimal and my posture slightly rigid, giving her everything she wanted to see. A woman on the edge of a nervous breakdown. Porch. The grand ballroom was a sea of pastel designer dresses, extravagant floral centerpieces, and the sharp clink of crystal champagne flutes. This was the Atlanta Heritage Charity Brunch, the absolute crown jewel of Valerie and Chloe's social calendar. Porch. They were raising funds for a historic preservation foundation, a cause they cared about strictly because it guaranteed their names printed in the society pages. The women here wielded gossip like scalpels, slicing apart reputations between bites of caviar and poached eggs. I took a deep breath and centered myself. Porch. I was walking straight into a trap, but I was the only person in the room who knew the snare had already been dismantled. Chloe spotted me from across the room instantly. Detaching herself from a small circle of wealthy women, she glided over, her smile sharp and entirely predatory. Porch. She grabbed my arm tightly. A bit too tightly, her acrylic nails digging into my silk sleeve, and pulled me toward a group near a high-profile table by the stage. Ladies, you remember my brother-in-law's wife, Maya, don't you? Chloe announced loudly, her volume pitched just enough for neighboring tables to catch every word. We are so relieved she could make it today. Porch. Terrence has been utterly beside himself dealing with her episodes lately. Honestly, we weren't even sure if she was stable enough to leave the house. The group of perfectly manicured women let out a chorus of fake, Southern-flavored sympathy. They murmured manufactured concern, looking me up and down like a pitiful charity case. I didn't lose my temper. Porch. I didn't raise my voice or defend my sanity. I simply lowered my eyes, let my hands tremble, and clutched my designer handbag tightly. the same handbag holding encrypted digital files detailing precisely how Chloe had been embezzling funds from Malik's contracting company. Chloe gestured to a server carrying a silver tray of fresh mimosas. Torch. She reached out, dramatically covering my empty crystal glass. None for Maya, Chloe said loudly, making sure the women at the next table turned to look. We absolutely cannot have a repeat of last Sunday's tragedy. Do we need to get you a babysitter, sweetie? Or maybe a bib? Just in case you face plant into the hollandaise sauce again and ruin that pretty beige suit. The women laughed. Torch. It was a polite, muffled sound, but dripping with pure malice. Chloe looked around triumphantly, securing the narrative that Terrence's wife was mentally unfit and completely unhinged. I played right into her performance. I allowed a deep sense of shame to wash over my face, playing the broken, helpless victim. Chloe soaked it up, basking in the glow of my public humiliation. Torch. The brunch dragged on for 2 agonizing hours. Servers brought out smoked salmon and truffled asparagus, but I had zero appetite. I picked at my food and let Chloe dominate the conversation. She went on at length about Malik's commercial construction firm, bragging about their recent cash flow and their upcoming luxury trip to the Amalfi Coast. Torch. She had no idea that Malik's company was secretly bleeding operating capital because the person holding the knife was sitting right next to her. As a fraud investigator, finding her hidden offshore accounts had taken me less than 20 minutes during my Tuesday lunch break. Chloe was arrogant, but she had zero mathematical talent. Torch. She had created a fake vendor profile in Malik's corporate billing system, disguising her personal account as a high-end architectural consulting firm. Using a basic shell company registered under her maiden name, she transferred precisely $9,900 at a time to avoid triggering federal reporting thresholds, a classic case of structuring. It was textbook financial crime, completely amateurish. Torch. I cross-referenced the vendor payment dates with her personal travel logs. Every single time Malik's company paid that fake architecture firm, Chloe miraculously returned from a shopping spree with a new diamond tennis bracelet or a limited edition designer bag. Torch. Over the past 14 months, she had embezzled over $2 million from her own husband, routing the capital into a private account in the Cayman Islands. All while the family's entire real estate empire was teetering on the edge of total bankruptcy. She thought she was building a secret exit strategy for when the family business inevitably collapsed. Torch. She had no idea her exit strategy was sitting quietly on my encrypted hard drive. Finally, the charity event began to wind down. Valets were called, and the wealthy guests started gathering their designer bags. Chloe turned to me, her eyes gleaming with the deep satisfaction of a successful public execution. Torch. The sedan is waiting outside for you, Maya, she said, putting on a benevolent savior persona for the rest of the table. Please go straight home and rest. We can't have Terrence dealing with another one of your embarrassing emotional breakdowns this weekend. He's under enough stress managing the family assets. I stood up, smoothing the creases on my beige trousers. Torch. Thank you so much for the invitation, Chloe, I said. My voice had suddenly lost its fragile tremble. The abrupt coldness and composure in my tone made her blink, a flicker of confusion crossing her perfectly contoured face. I stepped directly into her personal space, invading the physical distance she usually kept from me. Torch. I wrapped my arms around her shoulders, pulling her into a tight, inescapable hug. To the socialites at the table, it looked like a tender, familial moment between sisters-in-law. I pressed my lips close to her ear, inhaling the suffocating scent of her expensive floral perfume. Cayman National Bank, I whispered, my tone completely flat and razor-sharp. Torch. Reading number 0429, account ending in 7734, registered under Silver Creek Holdings. I felt Chloe's entire body freeze against mine. Her muscles locked up, and her breath caught in her throat. Her manicured hands stiffened in midair, hovering over my back. Torch. Structuring deposits under $10,000 to avoid federal reporting is a major felony, Chloe, I continued to whisper, the words cutting straight into her ear. Malik might eventually forgive you for sleeping around behind his back, but he will never forgive you for stealing $2 million from his operational budget. I took a step back and released the hug. The smug, victorious smile had been completely wiped from her face. All the color drained from her skin, leaving her looking pale and sickly beneath her expensive bronze contour powder. She stared at me, her eyes wide with pure, unadulterated terror. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Her hands were shaking so violently that her clutch dropped onto the carpeted floor with a dull thud. The other women at the table stopped their chatter, staring at Chloe in confusion, wondering what had turned the vibrant socialite into a ghost. I gave her a bright, radiant smile, pitching my voice loud enough for the entire table of wealthy women to hear. Have a wonderful afternoon, Chloe. And don't worry about me. I'm as sharp as a tack. I spun on my heel and strode out of the grand ballroom, my pace confident and powerful. I glided past the crystal chandeliers and ice sculptures, leaving the suffocating air of the country club behind. I didn't look back. Let her panic. Let her lie awake all night wondering how much I knew and who I was going to tell. Let her realize that the broken foster kid she thought was weak was actually the executioner hanging directly over her picture-perfect life. I had just struck a match and thrown it straight onto her marriage and her freedom. The dominoes were finally falling, and there was absolutely nothing they could do to stop it. I stepped out of the country club and climbed into the waiting sedan, the humid Georgia air doing nothing to thaw the ice running through my veins. The pure terror I had just painted onto Chloe's face was intoxicating, but it wasn't enough. She was merely a parasite feeding on a larger, dying beast. I needed to see exactly where she had buried her stolen cash. The moment I returned to the quiet emptiness of our suburban home, I walked straight into my secure home office. Bypassing standard security protocols on my workstation, I dived back into the digital maze of her Cayman Islands account. I had already confirmed the inbound pipeline from Malik's commercial contracting company, but parasites rarely hoard money. They spend it. I initiated a deep packet inspection on Silver Creek Holdings' outbound transfer logs. My fingers moved easily across the keyboard, tracing the alphanumeric paths across borders. Chloe was arrogant, but she lacked the basic financial literacy required to launder stolen capital effectively. Using a basic wire service, she routed massive monthly expenditures straight back into the United States. Following the digital breadcrumbs, I traced the funds to a domestic receiving account managed by an upscale property management firm in downtown Atlanta. I pulled up property records and cross-referenced the payment amounts. Chloe paid precisely $7,500 on the first of every month, an amount that matched the lease on a penthouse in one of the city's most exclusive high-rises. I needed to know who was living in that penthouse. Bypassing a basic firewall to access the property management database took less than 3 minutes. I pulled up the current tenant ledger for the luxury suite. The name on the lease made my hands freeze above the keyboard. The tenant was a 24-year-old woman named Madison, Chloe's younger sister. I leaned back in my ergonomic desk chair, staring blankly at the glowing monitor. Why would Chloe embezzle millions from her husband's construction business just to pay for her sister's luxury apartment? Logically, it made no sense. Chloe was deeply selfish. She was not the kind of woman to risk federal prison out of sisterly generosity. Leaning closer to the screen, my fraud investigator instincts screamed that a crucial piece of the puzzle was missing. I pulled up the penthouse's comprehensive billing history, and that was when the second shoe dropped. The actual monthly rent for that penthouse was $15,000. Chloe was only paying half. I immediately traced the second payment stream, covering the remaining balance. The routing number was heavily encrypted, hidden behind a corporate vendor code. Running a decryption sequence, I watched the progress bar slowly fill as the software devoured the data. When the true source account popped up on my screen, my stomach dropped through the floor. The other $7,500 came directly from the primary operational account of my in-laws' real estate enterprise. Roland and Valerie were personally footing the bill for the other half of Madison's lavish lifestyle. A dark, sickening realization spun in my gut. My in-laws were deeply conservative, image-obsessed snobs who scrutinized every penny leaving their failing empire. There was zero chance they were sponsoring the lifestyle of an unemployed 24-year-old white woman, unless she was providing something extraordinarily valuable in return. I needed to know what Madison was offering. Opening a new terminal, I accessed the database of our cellular provider. Terrence had a secondary mobile device he always claimed was a corporate burner for international acquisitions. I had never questioned it, respecting his professional boundaries. I plugged his secondary number into my tracking software and pulled up 6 months of historical geolocation data. The screen mapped Atlanta with thousands of tiny red data points showing where the phone had been. Filtering the data, I isolated the coordinates between 8 p.m. and 2 a.m. A massive cluster heat map appeared directly over that downtown luxury high-rise. Terrence wasn't working late on acquisitions, nor was he dining with international investors. For the past 6 months, every Tuesday and Thursday night, my husband had parked his car in the underground garage of that penthouse. Terrence was having a full-blown affair with his brother's sister-in-law. The sheer depravity of the situation washed over me like toxic sludge. As a Black woman who had survived the broken foster care system, I had fought for every ounce of dignity and success I possessed. Terrence and his family constantly reminded me that I lacked their so-called elite lineage, treating me like an uncultured charity case. Yet, behind closed doors, my husband was sleeping with Chloe's sister, a woman contributing nothing to society, living entirely off stolen funds. The betrayal ran far deeper than a simple affair, though. Roland and Valerie knew about it. They were actively paying the rent to keep Madison quiet and comfortable. The entire family was complicit in this grotesque violation of my marriage. Using family funds to buy a mistress kept Terrence happy and distracted, ensuring he played the obedient, dutiful son. They kept him compliant while finalizing their master plan to drug me, assault me, and steal my $12 million inheritance to save their bankrupt empire. They viewed me as nothing more than a disposable cash cow, a temporary nuisance to endure until the money hit their accounts. I didn't shed a single tear. My capacity for grief had burned away completely, replaced by a cold mechanical demand for absolute destruction. They wanted to operate like a crime syndicate, acting as though their wealth and status made them untouchable. They had completely underestimated the destructive power of a woman who had nothing left to lose and was ready to strike back. It was time to introduce a little chaos into their carefully constructed house of cards. Opening a clean, encrypted document, I needed to weaponize the information I had just uncovered without revealing my hand. If I confronted Terrence directly, he would panic and circle the wagons with his parents. I needed them to destroy each other from the inside. I locked my sights directly on Malik. He was the eldest son, the heavy lifter running the daily operations of the contracting firm. Arrogant, yes, but fiercely protective of his money. I compiled a highly specific financial discrepancy report, pulling the exact transaction logs from Chloe's fake architectural consulting firm, detailing the dates and the $9,900 withdrawals, draining Malik's business. I placed those figures directly alongside the billing ledger for Madison's downtown penthouse, highlighting the second payment stream, proving Roland and Valerie were using family funds to cover the other half of the lease. I left out all names, making no mention of the affair or the Cayman Islands account. I let the raw, undeniable math tell the story. The The numbers painted a perfect, indisputable picture of a massive financial conspiracy happening right under Malik's nose. His wife was stealing from him, and his parents were using family capital to support her sister. The absolute paranoia this was about to unleash would be glorious. I routed the document through 3 independent anonymous proxy servers, bouncing the signal through Europe before pointing it back to Atlanta. Locating Malik's private email address, the one he used strictly for off-the-books communications. I attached the discrepancy report and typed a simple, ominous subject line. Indit Review. Unresolved liability. I leaned back in the glow of the monitor, listening to the steady hum of the computer tower. Malik was a man ruled by pride and his wallet. When he opened that email and realized his own wife and parents were secretly moving hundreds of thousands of dollars behind his back, he wasn't going to ask polite questions. He was going to explode. The trust between the brothers would evaporate, and the foundation of their criminal empire would fracture under the weight of their own deceptions. Hovering my cursor over the execute command, I clicked intentionally, launching the email into the digital ether and planting a seed of absolute paranoia that would tear their family apart. The fallout from the anonymous email I sent to Malik was swift and radioactive. For the next 3 days, I watched silently as Terrence paced frantically down the hardwood hallways of our home. His phone was glued to his ear, his voice hushed in a tone of suppressed panic. Malik was turning their family business upside down, looking for the missing funds, and Terrence was caught right in the blast zone of his brother's absolute paranoia. The chaos spilled directly into their ultimate timeline. The 30-day holding period on my grandfather's trust account was entering its final 72-hour countdown. The pressure was suffocating them. They had to neutralize me completely before the transfer cleared to ensure I couldn't raise alarms or freeze the assets. Terrence was supposed to engineer my final downfall, but his mother, Valerie, clearly thought he was moving too slowly. She decided to step in with her own manicured hands. It was a Tuesday morning, and I was sitting at my desk in the high-security wing of my financial auditing firm. Our offices occupied the top 3 floors of a sleek glass and steel high-rise in downtown Atlanta, handling risk management and fraud detection for Fortune 500 companies. Security in our building was ironclad. You couldn't simply walk into our lobby without an appointment and verified digital clearance. I was reviewing a shell company audit when my desk phone rang with a sharp, urgent chime. The caller ID showed Jackson, the head of building security. When I picked up, Jackson's voice sounded unusually tense. He told me my mother-in-law was standing in the main lobby, creating a massive scene. She had brought a private medical transport team and was demanding immediate access to my floor. According to Jackson, she was hysterically screaming that I posed a severe danger to myself and others, trying to force her way past the turnstiles while claiming it was a life-or-death medical emergency. My blood ran cold, but my mind stayed as razor-sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. Valerie was accelerating the timeline, attempting to execute a forced psychiatric hold on me. In Georgia, once family members sign the paperwork and you're strapped to a gurney, fighting an involuntary commitment legally is notoriously difficult. Once they got me inside a private facility, they would heavily sedate me, validating their claims that I was insane. I would be locked away, stripped of my phone and financial autonomy, while my $12 million transferred smoothly into their bank accounts as planned. It was a terrifying, wickedly efficient plan. Her fatal mistake, however, was bringing her circus to my professional battleground. I told Jackson to hold her downstairs. Standing up, I smoothed the creases of my tailored charcoal suit and walked out of my office. Stepping into the glass elevator, I pressed the button for the ground floor. As the elevator descended smoothly, I watched the spectacle unfolding in the lobby through the transparent glass walls. The cavernous marble lobby was packed with morning foot traffic. Corporate executives, wealthy clients, and dozens of my professional peers stood in a wide circle watching the show. Valerie was right in the middle of the polished floor, delivering a masterclass in manipulative Southern drama. Dressed in a perfectly tailored navy suit dress, her signature pearl necklace draped elegantly over her collarbone, she sobbed loudly, wiping non-existent tears with an initialed silk handkerchief. Flanking her were two burly private medical orderlies in dark blue scrubs. Holding heavy nylon restraint straps, they looked far more like bouncers than healthcare professionals. When the elevator doors slid open, a soft chime cut through the hushed whispers of the crowded lobby. I stepped out onto the marble floor, radiating an aura of absolute, unbothered authority. I didn't run. I didn't show a trace of fear. Walking with a measured stride toward the reception desk, I saw Valerie leaning weakly against the granite counter, acting as if her heart were breaking. "There she is!" Valerie shrieked, pointing a trembling, perfectly manicured finger straight at my chest. The moment she saw me, she amped up her performance for the audience of wealthy executives. "Oh, my poor, sweet daughter-in-law. Please don't be afraid, Maya. We are just here to get you the help you so desperately need." I stopped 10 feet away, keeping a safe physical distance from the two muscular orderlies. Crossing my arms, I tilted my head, observing her like a specimen under a microscope. Valerie turned to the surrounding crowd, playing the part of a long-suffering, loving matriarch of a respectable family to perfection. "You all have to understand," she announced loudly, her voice echoing off the glass ceilings. "My son married a girl from the foster system. We tried to give her a wonderful life. We tried to heal her trauma, but the psychological damage is just too severe. She has been suffering from violent neurological blackouts. She is heavily addicted to dangerous sedatives. Last week, she had a complete breakdown at our family dinner table, slipping into a drug-induced coma. She is delusional now, posing a profound danger to herself and my son." A wave of whispers rippled through the lobby, and several of my colleagues exchanged concerned glances. This was the ultimate weapon used against successful women without elite backgrounds, especially Black women. The moment someone with wealth and status claims you're crazy, society leans toward believing them. Valerie knew precisely what she was doing, attempting to strip away my freedom while destroying my professional credibility in one fell swoop. The larger of the two orderlies took a step forward, his heavy boots thumping against the marble. "Ma'am, we have a medical transport unit parked outside. We can do this the easy way, or we can use force. It's entirely up to you, but you have to come with us today." I didn't even glance at the man. My eyes remained locked entirely on Valerie. "You cannot simply walk into a corporate security firm and kidnap an executive, Valerie," I said, my voice carrying a quiet, lethal resonance that instantly took control of the room. "This isn't a kidnapping, sweetie," Valerie countered, offering a sickeningly sweet, razor-sharp smile. Reaching into her expensive leather tote bag, she pulled out a thick stack of legal documents printed on heavy bond paper. She slapped them down on the reception counter, sliding them toward Jackson, the security chief. "I have full medical power of attorney. My son Terrence signed this affidavit this morning. We have the legal authority to commit her to a private psychiatric facility for a mandatory 90-day evaluation. The doctors are waiting for her right now." I looked down at the documents resting on the polished granite counter. As a forensic fraud investigator, I spent my life authenticating legal paperwork, and I didn't even need to pick up those pages to spot the glaring structural errors. The notary stamp was placed too high in the margins, indicating a digitally reconstructed image rather than a physical seal. The signature line bore Terrence's messy handwriting, but the witness signatures were clearly forged by the same hand that signed the primary authorization. Desperate to execute the trap before the banking deadline, they had rushed the forgery. It was a sloppy, arrogant attempt, They naively assumed their wealthy social standing would prevent anyone from questioning the paperwork. They thought these orderlies would grab me. Building security would step back out of deference to a family matter, and I would vanish into a padded ward before lunch. I slowly uncrossed my arms, taking a measured step forward. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I gave Valerie none of the hysteria she desperately needed to validate her fake narrative. I maintained a chilling composure that made the two orderlies hesitate, exchanging an uncertain glance. Valerie's confident smile began to fracture. She had expected me to run or fight back physically, which would have given the medical team a legal excuse to restrain me. My absolute stillness derailed her script. Jackson, the security chief, stepped out from behind the reception desk. A retired military policeman who had worked for our firm for 6 years. He knew my character and professional rigor. He was currently staring at the forged documents on the table, with deep professional skepticism. "Maya," he said cautiously, his hand resting near his radio. "Do you need me to call the local police to verify these transport orders?" Valerie threw her shoulders back, attempting to pull rank. "That won't be necessary," she snapped, her tone sharp and aggressive. "I am Valerie from Atlanta Real Estate Enterprise. These documents are completely legitimate, and these men are licensed medical professionals. Hand her over immediately, or I will sue this entire building for obstructing a lawful medical intervention." I stared at my mother-in-law, seeing the desperate feral greed burning behind her expensive makeup. She was so close to her $12 million payday she could almost taste the stolen fortune. Tilting my head slightly, I looked straight at Jackson. I extended a single rock-steady finger, pointing directly at the two men in dark blue scrubs. "Jackson," I said, my voice echoing clearly across the silent lobby. "These documents are fraudulent forgeries. This is an attempted corporate kidnapping taking place on private commercial property." I turned back to face Valerie, a cold, terrifying smile finally breaking across my face. I looked straight through her arrogant facade, seeing the rotten core of her desperate, bankrupt life. "Lock the front doors," I commanded, my voice carrying absolute, undeniable authority. "Lock the gates and shut down the elevators. Nobody leaves this lobby." The heavy magnetic locks on the main lobby doors engaged with a deafening metallic slam that echoed across the polished marble floor. Jackson didn't hesitate for a single second. He trusted my judgment completely. Signaling to the other security officers, the revolving glass doors were deadbolted within seconds. Power to the elevators was cut, freezing the digital displays. The bustling crowd of executives, corporate attorneys, and wealthy clients froze instantly, their morning coffees suspended in mid-air. The entire ground floor of the corporate high-rise had become a sealed, impenetrable vault. Valerie stared at the dead-bolted doors, her manicured hands beginning to tremble uncontrollably as reality shattered her arrogant composure. She spun around to look at me, her chest heaving violently beneath her expensive navy dress. "You can't hold me here," she shrieked, her voice cracking with manufactured rage. "This is unlawful imprisonment. I have medical power of attorney. You're having a psychotic episode, Maya. You're making a massive scene." "The only scene being made here is the one you brought through those doors, Valerie," I replied calmly, taking another step closer to her. "You thought you could walk into my workplace, weaponize my past, and carry me off like trash, so you and your family could steal my inheritance. You thought because I grew up in foster care I wouldn't know how to defend myself." I turned my attention to the two orderlies, whose posture had completely collapsed. They were backing away toward the locked glass doors, realizing they had been hired to commit a high-level felony in a building filled with corporate security experts and lawyers. "Gentlemen," I said, my tone as cold as ice, "if you drop those restraint straps right now and stand against that wall, I will instruct security not to press charges for trespassing. If you touch those straps again, you will be named as co-conspirators in an attempted kidnapping ring." The heavy nylon straps hit the marble floor instantly with a loud slap. Both men backed up against the far wall, putting their hands in the air. Valerie's face turned a sickly shade of gray. She looked around the locked lobby, realizing she was completely trapped. The corporate executives she had tried to manipulate were now pulling out their phones, recording her every word. "You're insane, Maya," she whispered, her voice trembling with real, unadulterated fear for the first time. "Terrence will ruin you for this." "Terrence can try," I whispered back, leaning in so only she could hear me. "By Thursday morning, your family business won't have enough money left to buy a cup of coffee, let alone hire a lawyer. The wire transfer is executing, Valerie, but it's not going where you think it is." She gasped, her eyes widening in sheer horror as the realization hit her that I knew about the money, the transfer, and the entire plot. Before she could speak, the sirens of the local police department began wailing outside the glass doors, called by our security team. The red and blue lights flashed through the heavy glass, illuminating Valerie's ruined face. "Your ride is here, Valerie," I said smoothly, stepping back and straightening my jacket. "And unlike yours, mine comes with handcuffs." The police filed into the lobby, and within minutes, Valerie's fraudulent medical power of attorney was seized as evidence. Her dramatic narrative collapsed under the weight of her own forged paperwork, and as the officers escorted her out of the building in cuffs for attempted fraud and filing false documents, the lobby erupted into hushed, shocked chatter. I stood by the reception desk, watching her expensive navy dress disappear into the back of a police cruiser. The 30-day timer was down to less than 48 hours. The trap was sprung, the pieces were in place, and the fall of their empire was officially unstoppable. I never raised my voice. I didn't need to. Real power never screams to make itself felt. I walked straight up to the granite reception desk, closing the physical distance between us. The two massive orderlies shifted their weight, suddenly looking uncertain. They were used to dragging terrified, confused patients out of their beds in the dead of night. They were completely unprepared to face a senior forensic investigator who had just commandeered a corporate fortress in broad daylight. Reaching inside my tailored suit jacket, I pulled out a fresh, sealed folder, stamped with the logo of an accredited independent medical lab. I slapped it down on the cold granite countertop, right next to Valerie's stack of forged documents. The sharp, loud thud cut through the tense silence of the lobby. "That's not a psychiatric evaluation," I said, my voice carrying a deadly, icy clarity. "That is a certified comprehensive toxicology report. Within 12 hours of your little Sunday dinner, I had blood and hair follicle samples drawn at an independent clinic. The results are notarized, legally binding, and currently sitting safely in the local police department's secure digital vault." Valerie stared at the clinical black and white print, looking at the pages as if they were dripping with acid. She refused to touch them, so I reached out and opened the cover for her. With a steady, manicured finger, I pointed directly to the highlighted chemical breakdown on the second page. "Since your eyesight seems to be failing you, let me read it to you," I continued, my tone conversational but lethal. "The lab detected high residual concentrations of flunitrazepam in my bloodstream." For those unfamiliar with the medical jargon, that is a heavy-duty, illegal sedative commonly known as a date rape drug. It induces profound anterograde amnesia and immediate physical incapacitation. The exact dosage and metabolic breakdown curve in my system matched the timeline of your dinner party down to the minute. You didn't witness a neurological blackout, Valerie. You and your family deliberately drugged my drink. A sharp, audible gasp rippled through the surrounding crowd. Several executives pulled out their phones, recording the confrontation. For a woman who had spent her entire life meticulously packaging a flawless image of Southern elegance, this undeniable scientific proof of her complete depravity was a crushing blow. She couldn't gaslight a blood sample. She couldn't manipulate a mass spectrometer. All the color drained from her face, leaving her looking sickly and suddenly 10 years older. I shifted my focus entirely away from her, locking eyes with the two men in dark blue scrubs. They were still holding those heavy nylon restraint straps, but their aggressive posture had completely collapsed. These were mercenaries making a profit in the gray zones of private healthcare, quietly handling problematic relatives for wealthy families. But they were mercenaries, not martyrs. "Gentlemen," I said, addressing them with chilling professional courtesy, "I know you were hired by a private agency. I know Valerie likely paid your company a massive premium to bypass standard medical transport protocols and execute a quick psychiatric snatch and grab. But you need to look very closely at the woman who hired you, because she just dragged you straight into a federal felony." The taller orderly swallowed hard, taking a visible step back. "We're just doing a job, ma'am," he stammered, his voice defensive. "We have signed medical authorization forms." "Those forms are amateur forgeries," I countered, stepping closer to him. "The paper is expensive bond, but the watermark lacks the specific ultraviolet security strip required for state-certified medical affidavits." Terrence likely downloaded a generic template from a legal aggregate site and hastily filled in the blanks. "The notary seal is digitally forged, and the witness signatures are fake." The arrogance of the wealthy always makes them believe working-class people will just bow down the moment they see expensive clothes and hear an authoritative tone. I leaned in, dropping my voice so only the two orderlies could hear the absolute threat in my words. "If you put a single finger on my suit jacket, you aren't performing a medical transport. You are actively participating in an attempted corporate kidnapping on private commercial property, and you will be named as co-conspirators in the poisoning of a senior financial executive. I guarantee you that your employer's liability insurance does not cover intentional felony conspiracy. If you try to restrain me, you will spend the next 20 years in a federal penitentiary, while Valerie and her bankrupt family use you as scapegoats." The two men looked down at the forged documents on the table, then at the certified toxicology report. They looked at the dead-bolted glass doors, then at the stern faces of the corporate security team surrounding the lobby. The moment I mentioned the police department's digital vault, their risk assessment calculations shifted violently. They realized Valerie wasn't an anxious mother trying to conduct a desperate intervention. She was a desperate criminal, trying to use them as disposable human shields in a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. The taller orderly dropped the heavy nylon restraint straps directly onto the marble floor. The thick straps hit the ground with a dull, decisive slap. "We're out," he announced, raising his hands in total surrender. "We are definitely not going to prison for this crazy woman." Turning to his partner, the two immediately backed away from Valerie, retreating to the furthest corner of the lobby to wait for the doors to unlock so they could run. Valerie was left completely exposed. Her private muscle had abandoned her. Her forged paperwork was worthless. An entire lobby of wealthy executives was witnessing her public destruction. Realizing she was trapped, panic finally shattered her composed facade entirely. She lunged forward, her manicured hands clawing desperately across the counter to grab the toxicology report. "Give me that!" she shrieked, her voice shrill and desperate. "You're lying! You made all of this up! You sick, delusional foster girl! You're trying to ruin my family!" Before her fingers could touch the paper, Jackson intercepted her. Stepping smoothly in front of the counter, he blocked her path and caught her wrists with firm, professional force. "That's enough, ma'am," Jackson said, his voice echoing with absolute authority. "The police are already downstairs. You can explain your medical theories to the detectives." The wail of police sirens pierced through the thick glass windows of the lobby. Flashing red and blue lights illuminated the street outside, sweeping over Valerie's terrified face. Jackson signaled the security guard to disengage the magnetic locks on the front doors. 4 uniformed officers burst into the building, hands resting on their duty belts as they quickly assessed the scene. Porch. Jackson handed the forged medical documents to the lead officer and pointed directly at Valerie. As the officers approached, Valerie fought back wildly. The elegant high society matriarch completely dissolved into a screaming, thrashing wreck. She kicked her designer heels uselessly against the polished floor, shrieking at the top of her lungs. Porch. "You can't arrest me," she screamed hysterically as the officers firmly pinned her arms behind her back, snapping cold metal handcuffs onto her wrists. "Do you know who I am? I am Valerie from Atlanta Real Estate Enterprise. My son will ruin you. My son will take everything from you, Maya. You won't get away with this." I stood completely still, watching her struggle against the police. Porch. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just calmly watched the matriarch of the family, the woman who had abused me, drugged me, and treated me like disposable trash, get marched out of my office building in chains. The public humiliation was absolute. Porch. Before the sun went down, every single one of her high society friends and every business contact who had ever respected her name would hear about her total collapse. The 2 orderlies were detained for questioning, while Valerie was shoved directly into the back seat of a police cruiser. The door slammed shut, cutting off her frantic, arrogant threats. Porch. The crowd in the lobby fell into a stunned silence, parting like the Red Sea to make a path for me. I turned around, smoothed the lapels of my charcoal suit, picked up my certified toxicology report, and walked calmly back to the elevators. The weightless feeling of the elevator carrying me smoothly upward felt like a physical embodiment of my rising power. Porch. I had spent years bending over backward, trying to fit into their suffocating family dynamic, constantly trying to prove my worth to people who viewed my foster background as a permanent stain. And today, I stripped them of their power completely. The officers yanked him forward, dragging him down the stage steps. Porch. He screamed my name in a desperate, pathetic rage, but the sound was quickly drowned out by the chaos in the room. Valerie wept uncontrollably as she was led out in her diamond necklace, and Chloe kept her head down, crying as she was taken to face a federal judge. I didn't stay to watch them load my former family into the back of police cruisers. Porch. Stepping out through a side exit, I walked away from the noise and panic. The warm, heavy Georgia summer air wrapped around me like a comfortable embrace. Their suffocating arrogance, their racism, and the heavy weight of their toxic greed had completely vanished. Walking down the curved driveway, my private hired driver was waiting in an idling Maybach. Porch. I slid into the luxurious leather back seat and took one last look at the sprawling country club through the dark, tinted windows. I had my fortune. I was completely vindicated. The heavy burden was gone, the nightmare was over, and my real life was just beginning.